I'm Jennifer Wong, a journalist and comedian. The experience of being Chinese in Australia is something I've observed and written about for almost 20 years. And as someone who grew up in Sydney in the 90s, my sense of feeling welcome in this country has wavered over time. These days, Australia and China are at loggerheads.
The trade tussle between Canberra and Beijing continues.
The drums of war are beating.
The Chinese government should be totally ashamed.
So I'm keen to understand what it's all about. Every day there's talk of China's rising power, conflict over Taiwan, and President Xi Jinping's China dream. In this two-part special, I'll explore what this all means.
It's like a bad marriage.
For Australians,
it was quite blatantly racial profiling.
For the Chinese, and the world.
伟大光荣英雄的中国人民，万岁！
If China's national anthem sounds like a battle cry, it is. The song's lyrics date back to the Japanese invasion in the 1930s. These are words the school students take to heart. The UFA Martial Arts School is producing warrior citizens. Yue was a 12th century Chinese general, and these days he's a folk hero. His name is synonymous with loyalty and patriotism. This fighting spirit is at the core of President Xi Jinping's leadership. And it was on full display last month at the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party.
中国人民也绝不允许任何外来势力欺负、压迫、奴役我们。谁妄想这样干，必将在14多亿中国人民 用血肉铸成的钢铁长城面前，碰得头破血流。
President Xi Jinping is pitting China against the rest of the world, encouraging all citizens to stand up for China's interests at home and abroad. And it's all in pursuit of something called the China Dream.
So the China Dream is about making China as a country, as a state, more prosperous, more powerful. So for individuals, it's not about individually becoming wealthier, but it's about taking pride in China, the country, the state becoming more powerful.
The party state relied exclusively on nationalism as the tool for its legitimacy. From kindergarten up to university, they are indoctrinated with the narrative of the Chinese party state nationalism.
At the UFA Martial Arts School, students are taught core subjects, but the China Dream is considered equally important.
对孩子们的教育，主要是传承岳飞爱国的精神。这些爱国主义精神，我们是都是必修课的。当然呀，那每个人都要爱自己的国家嘛。 怎么能不爱国呢？
因为就像岳飞一样，保家卫国呀。
从小我的父亲就跟我说，要保家卫国。岳飞是保家卫国。
因为有国才有家呀，保护好国家才有自己的家呀。
It's a message they'll take from the school to their careers.
他们的梦想大部分都是长大了以后去当兵，为自己的祖国做贡献。他们的梦想就是像岳飞一样，保卫自己的国家。
And it's clear what some of these students want to be.
当兵。
For others, a different dream.
拍电影。
But acting can also be patriotic.
1226年，金兵大举入侵中原，岳飞同军开始了他抗击金军、保家卫国的勇马生涯。
Recovering the old empire may be on China's to-do list, but its warrior spirit can also be seen in its interactions with other countries. And Australia is no stranger to that. I'm a long way from China, getting ready to float through the skies over Melbourne.
Basically, we are now just blowing with the wind.
It's a bit like running a tourism company in a pandemic. And can I ask, how's business been in the last 12 months?
Oh, look, it's been traumatic. You know, I must say that I was feeling like the 5 stages of grief every day. We're only working at about 40% capacity.
So how important were the Chinese tourists to the market for you?
Well, I mean, we had invested heavily in China. I mean, for the past 6 years, we've been really streamlining behind Tourism Australia's push into China. And yeah, I mean, it was very successful to the point where 50% of our business was coming out of China. So when the government closed the border to China, I mean, that was a really catastrophic shutdown of our business, even before other businesses went into lockdown.
The closed borders have devastated Kiff Saunders' tourism business. Now he fears there's even more to lose. Before COVID-19, Chinese tourists brought in $12.4 billion a year. But there's concern those tourists won't come back in the same numbers, thanks to a spat where insults have gone back and forth between the two countries. Tensions began in 2018. But after Canberra demanded an investigation last year into the origins of COVID-19, relations plummeted even further.
I do think relationships between China and its partners, Australia and China, will be changed in some ways.
The fallout? Australia lost about $20 billion in exports of goods to China. Since then, relations have only worsened.
澳方屡屡在涉及中国核心利益和重大关切的问题上采取错误言行。
It's an absolute outrageous and disgusting slur.
And last year, Beijing warned its citizens not to travel here as tourists, even when borders reopen.
So this is one of the special, magnificent things that you will not do anywhere else in the world, folks, is drift through the buildings of a city of 4.5 million people.
Kiff, what do you think of the trade spat between China and Australia?
Well, I think that geopolitics is well above my pay grade, but it's confusing. I mean, we have been encouraged for the past 6 years to get into China, to create relationships, to attract business. And yeah, I think anything that kind of then just kind of shuts that down is really, it's hard to understand as a business. And, you know, we're friendly, we're kind, we're safe, we're willing to go out of our way. And I think that, you know, it gets a bad rap when it's been politicised, or there is this kind of like, you know, just, you know, throwing rocks across the fence at each other.
Bilateral relations are so bad, Canberra can't even get Beijing on the phone.
It's like a bad marriage. It's just, it's disrespectful and doesn't achieve anything. I think that's really important that that if you're going to try and achieve anything, then you've got to be able to come to the table with understanding of the other person's position.
What would the loss of Chinese tourists mean to Australia?
I think that it would be a great loss to the Chinese not to be able to be given the opportunity to come here, because I love the Chinese. I love them as a traveller. The politics are not the people. So it's a political problem, not a national problem in all of this. So don't make it about the national. Don't turn it into suspicion or these people are not good. It pains me and really hurts me.
Ready? Just a little bump here. Nothing too dramatic. Look up and you'll see the deflation system.
Oh! That was incredible. I've never been in the sky like that before, and what a place to have a conversation about China-Australia relations. I want to find out more about why the relationship between China and Australia has hit rock bottom. So I'm meeting Yun Feng, China Policy Advisor and editor of the ANU China Story. We're meeting at a Canberra institution, the city's oldest Chinese restaurant. Yun, it's been an eventful year for China and Australia, but what's really going on? What's China thinking? What's Australia thinking?
From China's perspective, it sees itself as a great power, that it can throw its weight around. And Australia is only a middle power. So Australia should be basically more considerate of China's interests.
Respectful even?
Yeah, that's right. That's China's perspective. But from Australia's perspective, although China is a rising power, Australia is more aligned first with the United States as the ally and also with the Western democracy in terms of its values. And China's rise in some ways challenges or threatens that kind of value.
Help me understand the China component a little bit more. So, for example, with Xi Jinping's thinking, how does it compare to the thinking of previous leaders in China?
When Mao died, Deng came into power, and under Deng, the focus is basically on getting China to become rich. And for that, it basically was biding its time, and it didn't want to throw its weight around, causing other countries to suspect China's rise.
So to keep a low profile.
To keep a very low profile, exactly. But for Xi, his sense is that China's time has arrived, that China is now rich enough, and the next stage is to become powerful. And for that, it looks at what the United States is doing and basically emulate its tactics based on what other great powers have been doing.
One way that China has been exerting power is through what's been called wolf warrior diplomacy. The term comes from a popular movie franchise about a Chinese special forces soldier who battles against foreign enemies. It's basically China's version of Rambo. With wolf warrior diplomacy, Chinese diplomats don't hold back.
美国是最大的国际秩序破坏者。
美国自己生了病，还要装成医生。
日澳两国渲染所谓的中国威胁，对中国进行恶意的抹黑攻击。
For years, the Chinese Communist Party has fiercely defended itself against foreign comments about its most sensitive subjects, such as human rights abuses of Uyghurs in China's Xinjiang province, the eroding of freedoms in Hong Kong, Taiwan's independence, and the militarization of the South China Sea. Now, China does more than defend itself. To help me understand wolf warrior diplomacy, I'm meeting another China expert, Dr. Feng. Dr. Feng, 你好，你好.
Because the state ideology for the time being under Xi Jinping was that we are very strong, but the world, Australians included, are not prepared to accept our legitimate position. So we need to educate them.
Yep.
We need to push them.
A significant push came last year after the release of a report into alleged Australian war crimes. A Chinese diplomat tweeted out this crude, doctored image.
The repugnant post made today of an image, a falsified image, of an Australian soldier threatening a young child with a knife. A post made on an official Chinese government Twitter account is truly repugnant. It is deeply offensive. The Chinese government should be totally ashamed of this post.
Is that an example of wolf warrior diplomacy?
You can say that it's a typical case to fence off any criticism of the West, Australia included, is that, whoa, you are not qualified to criticize us. You did something very bad or even worse than us before. So if we suppress Hong Kongers or Taiwanese or Tibetans or Uyghurs, we are entitled to do it because this is internal affair of the Chinese government. You suppress Aboriginals, you send your troops to Afghanistan or other part of the world to kill innocent people out there as well. You are not qualified.
In other words, it's a tit for tat, and China's message to Australia is, mind your own business. Every day, Australian newspapers seem to have stories about China as the enemy. But what's the flip side to this? What do people in China, or at least Beijing, think of Australia?
砂矿，对吧？是吧？澳大利亚砂矿，全国出过世界各地，对吧？是吧？
澳大利亚袋鼠吧，然后浣熊，应该就这两个。
While it's surprising to learn that the North American raccoon comes to mind, it's perhaps less surprising to learn that ordinary people have noticed the growing tensions too.
澳大利亚对中国不好啊，和中国关系不是很友好。
为什么不好？
我们澳大利亚对中国不友好。我们感觉中国挺好的，中国挺好客的，但是。
It hasn't always been like this. Australia used to have a great reputation.
澳大利亚海滩悉尼歌剧院，就是那个，然后好多同事跟朋友就喜欢去澳洲留学。
Ah, yes, students. The next target in the trade war is feared to be education, and it's a big one. International students are Australia's fourth largest export after coal, iron ore and gas. And Chinese students are by far the most important market. So when Beijing warns students not to come to Australia, there's $12 billion at stake. China says Australia is not safe for students because of racism. And there are reports that Chinese education companies are being told to dissuade students from choosing Australia as a study destination.
那你假期就待这儿？
假期没啥好，找实习。
你就实习1个月啊？
实习也就只能在上海实嘛。我没啥好，你实习吗？
我应该不实习了。我要实习。
Flora and Hao Yi are both enrolled at the Australian National University. They should be in Australia, but they're locked out by our border restrictions. Instead, they're in Shanghai, working out of a study hub, which ANU has set up for students stuck abroad.
Hi, 为你等好。
It's not Canberra, but it's something. Hi Flora, what are you studying?
I have studied finance, Master of Finance in Australia, and I haven't been to Australia yet.
If the borders were open now, would you come to Australia?
Of course, if the border is open, I will go to Australia immediately because I hope have the real campus life. So it's very important for me to make new friends with other countries through the university life.
Flora hasn't been scared off by government warnings about racism. And Hao Yi's already done a semester of his political science degree in Canberra, and he wants to come back.
Basically, the life back in Canberra is quite wonderful. I do miss the time I spent with professors, talking with them, discuss with them about my research, but you can't interact with professors face-to-face personally by online teaching.
Flora and Hao Yi are prime examples of what's at stake. Sure, students bring big bucks, but they're not just a commodity. What we risk missing out on is relationship building. If the bad blood continues, students might look elsewhere for that experience. If you can't come back to Australia, would you look to study elsewhere?
Yeah, of course. I'm always open to other options, like Britain, Singapore, the United States, and Hong Kong.
Well, I hope things change and you get back here real soon.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
Australia and China are not getting along. The spat has seen the Chinese government warn its people not to come to Australia because of racism and violence against Asians. The Australian government says there's nothing to see here, but is our government wrong and theirs right? A bunch of recent reports say yes. A Lowy report found that a third of Chinese Australians had been called offensive names in the first year of COVID-19, and a quarter said they'd been physically threatened or attacked. It's not just Chinese people who've been targeted. Other Asians have been too, because racists can't tell us apart. Yun is Chinese, and like most Asian Australians, she's experienced racism since she was a kid. But lately, it's gotten a lot worse.
When I first moved to the area, I noticed at the bus stop there was a sign that said, "No more Asians," and just saying we shouldn't allow more Asians in. And I was just a bit like, what suburb have I moved to? So when COVID kicked off in late February, every time I went to the bus stop, there was this blonde woman who would say very viciously to me, "Fuck off." And every time I walked past, she would look utterly repulsed. Eventually, I got really anxious and scared that she would keep glaring and swearing at me. So I had to start asking other women if I could walk behind them because it was just really scary, the thought of seeing this woman every morning at the bus stop swearing at me.
And what happened to you at work?
When Donald Trump was labeling the coronavirus the Chinese flu and he was told that it was racist, he said, "It's not racist, it's from China." Colleagues started saying China to me and then bursting into laughter. Or I'd be walking to the toilet and somebody would be playing the clip and looking at me to see my reaction. And I just felt really embarrassed, but I couldn't kick up a fuss because I didn't want to seem too sensitive. I don't want any attention to be drawn to my race, and I just thought, why can't I just get on with life? But thankfully, I've left that workplace.
What happened to Yun, unfortunately, happens everywhere, even at Parliament House. At a Senate committee last year, Yun Feng experienced this very publicly, even though she's been an advisor to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. She was one of 3 Chinese Australians who were asked this question.
Can I ask each of the 3 witnesses to very briefly tell me whether they are willing to unconditionally condemn the Chinese Communist Party dictatorship?
The question has been described as McCarthyism.
It was quite blatantly racial profiling. It definitely felt to me like a loyalty test that I have to choose between China and Australia, and I have to condemn China in order for my views to be accepted by everyone there. And that is something that really saddens me that people would really think that is necessary.
And what did you say when you were asked to unreservedly denounce the Chinese Communist Party?
I don't think it's fair to force all Chinese Australians to take a position or political action when similar requests are not being made to other Australians.
With the trade wars between China and Australia at the moment, and also things like, you open the newspaper and there's a headline about China and Australia going to war, for example, do you think that we've come to a moment that can be compared to the Pauline Hanson moments in 1996, where there's this us versus them situation?
Luckily, I was not in Australia in 1996.
Oh, it was a great time. You missed out.
I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
At the time, I remember feeling that this speech gave a lot of people permission to be openly anti-Asian.
Violence erupts on the streets of central Melbourne.
And it feels like we're back there again now, with anti-Chinese sentiment.
Already I am hearing people are basically being asked to pick a side. They're saying, war is coming, it's imminent, you better, show your loyalties, pick a side, public announce whose side you're on. It feels strangely a little bit like what you read about a Cultural Revolution, right? You can't keep silent, you have to always denounce. Even if it's your relative, you have to denounce someone. You don't even have the liberty of staying silent. So this is a very, very toxic environment we're in right now.
And what's actually at stake here when we're talking about these two countries not getting along, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of dimensions. There's a economic dimension of the trade war having an effect on certain industries. There's people-to-people links, especially with Chinese Australians and Chinese international students getting stuck in the middle. And then there is also the geopolitical question of what sort of future the international structure is going to be. And lastly, it's a question of what's the future we want for the world and for ourselves.
任何人都不要低估中国人民捍卫国家主权和领土完整的坚强决心、坚定意志、强大能力。
Next week on Dateline, part 2 of our China Dream special. With talk of war over Taiwan, what do the Taiwanese think of China's threats? And how do they feel about their identity and future? And up next, the feed.